Ethan awoke in a daze, his head pounding as he struggled to make sense of his surroundings. The last thing he remembered was the shadow lunging toward him in room 306. Now, he found himself in what appeared to be the same room, but something was off. The air was colder, unnaturally so. The wallpaper, once faded and peeling, was now pristine, as though the room had never been abandoned. The furniture looked new, untouched by time. Even the bed was neatly made, the sheets tucked in with precision. It was as if the hotel had been restored to its former glory overnight. Ethan's breath quickened as he turned toward the dresser mirror. His own reflection stared back at him, but something wasn't right. The room reflected in the glass was different from the one he stood in. It was dark, decayed, the way he remembered it. And then, movement, a figure emerged from the shadows within the mirror, a woman in a long, tattered dress, her face obscured by a veil. Ethan stumbled backward, his pulse hammering in his ears. The woman raised a hand, pressing her palm against the glass from the other side. A whisper echoed in the room, though her lips did not move. "Help me." Ethan's rational mind screamed at him to run, but his instincts told him otherwise. This was no ordinary haunting. The woman in the mirror was not a mere apparition, she was trapped. But how? And why? Summoning his courage, Ethan stepped closer. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman's veil began to lift, revealing hollow, sunken eyes that seemed to pierce into his soul. "You must leave," she urged, her voice trembling. "Before he finds you." A sudden gust of wind howled through the room, and the mirror began to shake violently. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface as an unseen force tried to shatter the barrier between worlds. The woman's expression turned to terror. "He's coming!" she cried. The room plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the fractured mirror. A low, guttural growl reverberated through the air, and Ethan felt an overwhelming presence behind him. He turned slowly, dread pooling in his stomach. There, standing in the doorway, was a shadowed figure, its form flickering like a distorted image on an old television screen. The entity exuded a malice so intense that Ethan could barely breathe. As it stepped forward, the temperature in the room plummeted even further, and the walls seemed to close in around him. The woman in the mirror screamed. "Run!" Ethan bolted for the door, his heart pounding as he fumbled with the handle. The entity lunged, and just as its outstretched hand reached for him, the mirror shattered into 1,000 shards, unleashing a deafening wail that rattled the entire hotel. Then, silence. Ethan collapsed against the hallway wall, gasping for air. The door to room 306 was gone once again, replaced by an unbroken stretch of wallpaper. His hands trembled as he reached for his camera. It was still there, still recording. Whatever was happening in the hallway was beyond his understanding. And he was no longer sure if he would make it out alive to tell the tale. Ethan spent the next morning reviewing the footage from the night before. His hands trembled as he pressed play, half expecting the camera to have captured nothing but static. Instead, the screen flickered to life, revealing the events of the previous night in chilling clarity. The woman in the mirror, the shadowed figure, the deafening shatter of glass. He hadn't imagined it. Determined to learn more, Ethan began combing through the hotel archives he had brought along, old newspaper clippings, faded photographs, and handwritten journals left behind by former guests. One name kept appearing: Margaret Holloway. She was the last known owner of the Holloway Inn before it shut down permanently. According to the records, Margaret had been found dead in room 306 nearly 70 years ago. The cause of death was listed as suicide, but the details were vague, and many believed something more sinister had taken place. Some guests reported seeing her wandering the halls long after her death, whispering to herself, as though searching for something, or someone. Ethan's pulse quickened. Could the woman in the mirror be Margaret Holloway? Determined to find answers, he decided to explore the abandoned west wing of the hotel, a section that had been sealed off after the fire decades ago. Breaking through the barricade was easier than he had anticipated. One solid push against the rotted wooden door, and it creaked open, revealing a corridor lost to time. Dust filled the air as he stepped inside, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper. The silence was suffocating. Each step echoed through the vacant hall, as if disturbing something that had long been asleep. At the end of the hallway stood a single door, slightly ajar. Room 306, Ethan's breath hitched. He knew he should turn back, but something compelled him forward. As he reached for the doorknob, a sudden chill gripped the air, and a whisper brushed against his ear, "Don't." He spun around, heart hammering, but saw nothing. Just the empty, decayed hallway stretching behind him. Swallowing his fear, Ethan pushed the door open. The room was untouched by time, pristine, as if it had been frozen the night Margaret Holloway died. A vanity stood against the far wall, its mirror unbroken, reflecting the dim light from his flashlight, and then, movement, a figure materialized in the reflection. Margaret, her hollow eyes locked onto Ethan's, filled with sorrow and something else, desperation. She lifted a trembling hand, pointing toward the vanity drawer. Ethan hesitated before stepping forward. His fingers curled around the handle, and with a deep breath, he pulled it open. Inside was a journal, its leather cover cracked with age. He flipped to the final entry, Margaret's handwriting scrawled in frantic strokes, "He won't let me leave. He keeps me here. Watching. Waiting. Someone, please, set me free." A sudden force yanked the journal from his hands. The mirror shattered, and the room plunged into darkness. A voice, barely a whisper, filled the air. "He knows you're here." And then, the door slammed shut behind him. Ethan sat frozen in his chair, staring at the shattered remains of the mirror on the floor. His breath came in short, ragged bursts as he processed what had just happened. Margaret's journal lay on the table before him, its pages still rustling as if touched by unseen hands. The words of her final entry echoed in his mind, "He won't let me leave." Who was he? Determined to find out, Ethan decided to conduct an experiment. He turned off all the lights in his room, save for a single candle, and positioned his camera to face the window. If something was lurking in the darkness of the Holloway Inn, he would capture it. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes as Ethan pressed the record button. The camera lens focused on the glass, reflecting his own anxious expression. But then, something shifted. A shape materialized in the reflection, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes that burned like embers. A hand, pale and skeletal, reached out toward the glass from the other side. Ethan's stomach twisted in fear, but he didn't dare move. He watched as the figure's mouth moved soundlessly, forming words he couldn't hear. Then, suddenly, the whispering began, low and insistent. The voices filled the room, overlapping, growing louder. They came from every direction, circling him like a swarm. He clutched his ears, but the whispers seeped into his mind like tendrils of smoke. "Leave. Leave before it's too late." Then, the window shattered, glass exploded into the room, sending shards flying in all directions. Ethan ducked, shielding his face as the candlelight flickered wildly. When he looked up again, the figure was gone. But in the corner of the room, something moved. A shadow detached itself from the darkness, gliding toward him. It had no features, no discernible form, just an overwhelming presence of malice. Ethan scrambled backward, his heart pounding. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shadow dissipated, vanishing into the walls. The whispers faded, leaving only the sound of Ethan's ragged breathing. His hands trembled as he checked his camera. The screen displayed static for a moment before clearing. The video had captured everything: the shadow, the figure in the window, the moment the glass shattered. It was undeniable proof that something unnatural was at work within the Holloway Inn. But the worst part, as Ethan reviewed the footage, he noticed something chilling. In the reflection, just before the window shattered, the shadowy figure had turned away from him, and looked directly at the door. Someone, or something, was coming for him. Ethan's fingers trembled as he clutched his flashlight, his mind racing to make sense of what he had just experienced. The whisper, the giggle, the shadow slipping away, it all felt too real to be a trick of his imagination. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to regain composure. He needed to keep moving, to document everything. That was the only way to prove to himself that this was nothing more than another haunted tale. As he turned back toward the hallway, he noticed something strange. The door to room 306 was no longer ajar. It was closed. Not just closed, gone. The faded wallpaper stretched seamlessly across where the door had been moments ago, as if the room had never existed at all. Ethan's stomach dropped. He ran his hands along the wall, feeling for any sign of a hidden entrance. His fingers met only cold, solid wood beneath the peeling wallpaper. His mind reeled. He had just been inside that room. He had seen the bed, the broken lamp, the scratches on the walls, but now, it was as if room 306 had vanished. His breath quickened. He pulled out his notebook and flipped to the page where he had sketched the layout of the second floor before arriving. The room had been there. He was sure of it. He turned on his camera and flipped through the photos he had taken earlier. The hallway, the numbered doors, the eerie shadows, all were still there. But when he came to the last photo, the one he had taken of room 306's entrance, his blood ran cold. The door wasn't in the picture. The space between 305 and 307 was nothing but an unbroken stretch of wall. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. His hands shook as he switched to video mode and hit record. He needed evidence of this. He held the camera up to the empty space, narrating what had just happened, his voice barely steady. Room 306 was right here, he said, pressing his free hand against the wall. I was inside just minutes ago. But now, a loud creak cut him off. He whipped around, his flashlight beam darting across the corridor. The air felt heavier now, pressing down on him with an almost suffocating weight. The floor beneath him groaned, as if something unseen was shifting its weight. Then, from behind him, a soft, drawn-out whisper slithered through the silence. You shouldn't have come. Ethan spun around, but there was nothing, just the empty hallway stretching into darkness. A chill ran through him, deeper than anything he had felt before. He had heard ghostly murmurs in the past, but this voice was different. It was clear. Sentient. As if something was watching him. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his journalistic drive wouldn't let him. He forced himself to take a step forward, then another. If the room had disappeared, maybe there was another way inside. Maybe. A floorboard suddenly snapped beneath his foot, sending him stumbling forward. He caught himself against the wall, his flashlight tumbling from his grip and rolling into the darkness ahead. As he reached for it, the shadows seemed to shift, and then, a door creaked open. A door that wasn't supposed to be there. Room 306 was back, but something was waiting inside. Ethan's breath came in short, ragged gasps as he stared at the reappeared door of room 306. His gut twisted in a mixture of fear and intrigue. What was happening here? Was the hotel itself shifting around him, bending reality to its will? He hesitated before stepping closer, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him. The hallway around him was silent, too silent. The oppressive stillness amplified the sound of his own heartbeat. Ethan reached for the doorknob with a trembling hand, but just as his fingers brushed against the cool brass surface, thump, a heavy footstep echoed from the far end of the corridor. He froze. His flashlight beam darted toward the source of the noise, but the darkness was impenetrable. He strained his ears, his entire body tensed. Thump. Thump, the sound was closer now. Slow. Measured. Deliberate. It was as if something, someone, was walking toward him in the darkness, unseen yet undeniable. Ethan's grip tightened on his flashlight. Who's there? He called out. His voice steadier than he felt. Silence. Then, thump, the sound came from directly behind him. Ethan spun around, heart hammering. His flashlight flickered as if in protest, the weak beam barely illuminating the peeling wallpaper and dusty floorboards. There was nothing there. No one. Just the long, empty hallway stretching before him. He exhaled shakily and turned back to the door. He needed to get inside that room before he lost his nerve. But just as he reached for the knob again, the sound returned, this time, rapid footsteps racing toward him from behind. Ethan barely had time to react before an unseen force shoved him forward. He stumbled into the door, his shoulder slamming against the wood with a dull thud. Pain shot through his arm, but he barely noticed. His mind was too consumed by the horror of what had just happened. The footsteps had been real. And something had touched him. He turned sharply, shining his flashlight wildly in all directions. Still, nothing. The corridor was as empty as before, yet the air felt charged with an unseen presence. Ethan swallowed hard and backed toward the door. He needed to get inside. Now, with a deep breath, he twisted the knob and pushed the door open. A wave of freezing air rushed past him, sending a violent shiver down his spine. The room was darker than before, the shadows deeper, more menacing. The broken lamp on the floor had moved slightly, as if something had nudged it. The bed was still untouched, its sheets pristine yet carrying an unsettling sense of wrongness. Then, from within the darkness, a sound, soft yet unmistakable, the creak of a floorboard. Someone, something, was inside the room with him. Ethan's flashlight trembled in his grip as he swept it across the space. His breath came in uneven gasps as he strained his eyes, searching for the source of the noise. The beam landed on the closet door, slightly ajar. Another creak. The closet door moved, just an inch. Ethan took a hesitant step forward. He had to see. He had to know. With one final, shaky breath, he reached for the closet door, and pulled it open. Darkness greeted him, then, a whisper, impossibly close to his ear, "You're not supposed to be here." The closet door slammed shut on its own. Ethan stood frozen in the dimly lit hallway, his breath coming in short, uneven gasps. The door to room 306 had vanished, then returned as if mocking him. His instincts screamed for him to leave, to run as far away from this place as possible, but his journalist's curiosity kept him rooted in place. He had to know the truth. Swallowing his fear, Ethan reached out, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the doorknob. A surge of icy energy shot up his arm, making him recoil. He clenched his jaw and forced himself to turn the knob. The door creaked open with an agonizing slowness, revealing the room beyond. The air inside was stifling, thick with an unseen presence. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift, pulsing as if they were alive. The furniture was coated in a fine layer of dust, untouched for decades, except for the bed. The covers were rumpled, as though someone had just risen from it moments before his arrival. Ethan stepped inside, his flashlight beam flickering as if struggling against the darkness. His breath caught in his throat as he noticed something on the wall opposite the bed, deep claw marks, as if someone had tried to scratch their way out. His pulse pounded in his ears. The legend of room 306 spoke of guests disappearing without a trace. Was this evidence of their desperate attempts to escape? He took out his camera and snapped a few photos, the flash momentarily illuminating the room. As he checked the screen, his stomach lurched. In the last image, a shadowy figure loomed in the corner, its hollow eyes staring directly at him. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in on him. A whisper, barely more than a breath, brushed against his ear, "You shouldn't be here." Ethan spun around, his flashlight shaking in his grip. The closet door had creaked open slightly, revealing an abyss of darkness within. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to step closer. He had to see. He had to know. Reaching out with a trembling hand, he pulled the door open. Nothing, just empty space. Relief flooded him, though it was short-lived. As he turned back to the room, a new horror greeted him. The bed was no longer empty, a figure lay beneath the sheets, its form eerily still. Ethan's breath caught as he inched forward, his mind screaming at him to stop. But he had to see. He had to know. He reached out and gripped the edge of the blanket. With one swift motion, he pulled it back. The room erupted in a gust of freezing wind, sending objects flying and slamming the door shut behind him. A scream, shrill and inhuman, filled the air as the shadowy figure from the photograph lunged toward him. Darkness consumed everything. There is something unsettling about old hotels. The creaky wooden floors, the dimly lit hallways, the echo of footsteps when no one is there. Perhaps it is the history soaked into the walls, the whispered stories that guests leave behind, or the tragedies that have never quite faded away. The Holloway Inn, an abandoned hotel nestled in the heart of the countryside, was one such place. For over a century, the Holloway Inn stood as a grand establishment, welcoming weary travelers and wealthy visitors alike. But one night, many decades ago, something happened that changed its fate forever. A mysterious fire broke out in the West Wing, claiming the lives of several guests and staff members. Ever since that tragic night, the inn was never the same. Strange occurrences plagued the guests who dared to stay. Doors would lock on their own, chilling whispers filled the halls, and figures lurked in the mirrors. It wasn't long before the Holloway Inn was abandoned, left to decay under the weight of its own ghostly secrets. However, legend says the spirits never left. Many have tried to uncover the truth about the Holloway Inn. Paranormal investigators, thrill seekers, and skeptics have all entered its haunted corridors, but few have stayed long enough to uncover the full story. Some claim to have seen the ghost of a bellboy still attending to invisible guests, others have reported hearing the cries of a woman trapped in an unseen room. But the most chilling tale of all is that of room 306, a room that is said to consume its occupants, making them disappear without a trace. When journalist Ethan Carter arrives at the Holloway Inn, he is determined to document its history and uncover the truth behind its eerie reputation. Armed with a camera, a notebook, and a team of researchers, he believes he can rationalize the tales and separate fact from fiction. But as the night unfolds, Ethan realizes that some stories are more than just legends. The deeper he digs, the more he awakens something that has been waiting in the shadows, something that does not wish to be disturbed. What lies within the Holloway Inn is far more terrifying than any ghost story ever told. And Ethan Carter is about to learn that some places should never be revisited. The sky was a deep shade of charcoal as Ethan Carter pulled his car onto the long, winding driveway of the Holloway Inn. The headlights cast eerie shadows on the overgrown trees that lined the road, their gnarled branches twisting like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. A thick fog clung to the ground, swirling around the tires as he drove closer to the towering structure ahead. The inn stood in haunting silence, its once grand facade now weathered by time and neglect. Ivy crawled up the walls like veins, and the massive wooden doors loomed before him, daring him to enter. Ethan took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter. He had spent years chasing ghost stories, but none had intrigued him as much as the legend of the Holloway Inn. As he stepped out of the car, the cold night air sent a shiver down his spine. He pulled his jacket closer around him and retrieved his camera and notebook from the passenger seat. His crew was supposed to meet him here, 2 paranormal investigators and a historian, but there was no sign of them yet. The silence was almost suffocating. Ethan approached the front door and hesitated for a moment before pushing it open. The hinges groaned in protest, and the musty scent of decay and old wood greeted him. Dust motes danced in the dim glow of his flashlight as he stepped into the grand lobby. The check-in desk stood abandoned, its ledgers still open as if waiting for guests who would never arrive. Faded portraits of long-deceased guests lined the walls, their eyes following him as he moved deeper into the building. The massive chandelier overhead swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. He heard it then, a whisper, so faint it could have been the wind. But the air was still. Ethan's heart pounded as he turned, scanning the lobby. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing in the emptiness. No response. Just the oppressive silence pressing in on him. He shook his head, forcing himself to focus. It was just his mind playing tricks on him. He made his way toward the grand staircase. Its red carpet faded and torn in places. The steps creaked beneath his weight, each one echoing through the vast emptiness of the inn. As he reached the second floor, a sudden chill filled the air. The hallway stretched before him, lined with numbered doors, some slightly ajar. He checked his phone, no signal. Typical. Then, a soft thud came from one of the rooms ahead. Ethan's breath hitched. His fingers tightened around his flashlight as he took a cautious step forward. The door to room 306 stood slightly open, a sliver of darkness beckoning him inside. His instinct screamed at him to turn back, but he had come too far to be deterred now. Taking a deep breath, Ethan reached out and pushed the door open. And what he saw inside made his blood run cold. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he peered into room 306. The air inside was thick with dust, yet the bed was neatly made, as if waiting for a guest. A broken lamp lay on the floor, and the walls bore deep scratches, as though someone had tried to claw their way out. A sudden chill wrapped around his body, raising goosebumps along his arms. He took a cautious step forward, the wooden floor creaking beneath his weight. The door creaked ominously as it swung open further, revealing a faded, moth-eaten curtain swaying despite the lack of a breeze. Then, a whisper, soft, almost too faint to catch, brushed against his ear, "Leave." Ethan spun around, his flashlight shaking slightly in his grip. The room was empty, but the sensation of being watched pressed in on him. He exhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. He had investigated countless haunted locations, but something about this place felt different. More sentient. He reached for his camera and snapped a few pictures, the flash illuminating the decayed walls for brief moments. As he reviewed the images, his pulse quickened. In the last photo, there was something in the mirror, a hazy reflection of a woman in an old-fashioned dress, her hollow eyes staring directly at him. A loud bang from the hallway sent his heart hammering against his ribs. Ethan turned sharply and rushed to the door, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. The hallway stretched before him, empty but somehow alive with unseen movement. The whispers began again, low murmurs that seemed to slither along the walls. He stepped out cautiously, the floorboards creaking underfoot. He could hear his own breathing, uneven and shallow. He reached for his radio, hoping to contact his team, but only static greeted him. Then he heard it, a soft giggle. It was distant yet distinct, like a child playing hide-and-seek. The sound came from the far end of the corridor, near the grand staircase. Ethan's fingers tightened around his flashlight as he moved closer. Every nerve in his body screaming for him to turn back. Just as he reached the top of the stairs, he felt a cold breath against his neck. "Run!" Ethan spun around, his flashlight catching the briefest glimpse of a shadow disappearing into one of the rooms. His blood ran cold. He wasn't alone, something was here, something that did not want him to stay. The air inside the hallway had grown thick with an unnatural presence. Ethan, Claire, and Marcus stood in the center of the grand hallway, their breath visible in the chilling air. The whispering voices that had plagued them since entering the inn now became louder, forming unintelligible words that seemed to come from every direction. "We need to leave," Claire insisted, clutching her arms. Ethan wasn't ready to give up. "Not yet. There's something the spirits are trying to tell us." A sudden gust of wind rushed through the hallway, slamming every door shut at once. The chandelier above them swayed violently, casting eerie shadows along the cracked walls. Then, a voice, low and strained, emerged from the darkness. "You have seen too much. Leave now, or suffer their fate." Marcus took a step back. "This isn't worth it, Ethan." But Ethan was transfixed. The voice wasn't just a warning, it was a final plea. With trembling hands, he raised his camera and aimed it down the hallway. The lens caught something his eyes couldn't, a group of shadowy figures standing at the far end, watching. Their forms flickered, almost as if they were shifting between past and present. Among them, the bellboy, the woman from the locked room, and other lost souls of the hallway inn stood in silent mourning. "Who are you?" Ethan whispered. The bellboy stepped forward. His hollow eyes met Ethan's. "We were like you once, curious, but curiosity has a price." Before Ethan could react, the walls of the inn trembled violently. The floor beneath them cracked open, revealing an abyss of swirling darkness. A powerful force began pulling them toward it, threatening to consume them entirely. "Run!" Marcus shouted, grabbing Claire's arm. Ethan hesitated for only a second before snapping one final picture. Then, they sprinted toward the exit. The spirits shrieked in agony as the walls of the inn seemed to close in on themselves. Just as they reached the doorway, a final whisper followed them. "The inn will always welcome you back." The moment they crossed the threshold, everything went silent. The hallway inn stood as it always had, lifeless and still, as if nothing had ever happened. Ethan turned back. The door was gone. He checked his camera. The last image showed not the spirits, not the collapsing inn, but an untouched hallway, pristine, empty, and waiting. What now? Claire asked, her voice shaky. Ethan exhaled. We finish this story, before it finishes us. The night had finally reached its breaking point. Ethan, Claire, and Marcus stood at the threshold of the Holloway Inn, their bodies trembling from exhaustion and fear. The spirits had warned them, the walls had tried to trap them, but something deep within the inn still refused to let them go. We have to finish this. Ethan murmured, staring at the camera in his hands. The final image was still displayed on the screen, an untouched, pristine hallway, as if nothing had ever happened. But Ethan knew better. The spirits were still watching. Claire shivered. How? How do we end this? Marcus glanced at the tattered journal they had found in room 306, the pages filled with the desperate writings of past victims. If the curse started here, maybe it can end here, he said. We need to confront it. Taking a deep breath, they stepped back inside. The moment they crossed the threshold, the inn came alive. The chandelier flickered, shadows darted across the walls, and a heavy presence loomed over them. The spirits were waiting. Ethan held up the journal. We know the truth now. The fire wasn't an accident. The hotel owner, Victor Holloway, trapped you here. A deafening howl filled the air, followed by a furious gust of wind that nearly knocked them off their feet. The shadows twisted and morphed, revealing the translucent figures of those who had perished in the fire. Among them was the bellboy, the woman from room 306, and a man with hollow eyes, Victor Holloway himself. You must set us free. The bellboy whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm raging inside the inn. Marcus flipped through the journal. There's a ritual. We have to burn the book at the center of the inn, where the fire first started. Ethan hesitated. If they did this, there was no turning back. But he had seen enough. With a determined nod, he ran towards the center of the lobby, dropping the journal onto the wooden floor. Claire struck a match, her hands shaking, and tossed it onto the pages. The flames erupted instantly, engulfing the book in a bright, unnatural light. The spirits let out a collective cry as the fire spread, consuming the room around them. The walls began to crack, the floors crumbling beneath their feet. Run! Marcus yelled. They sprinted toward the exit, dodging falling debris as the inn collapsed behind them. Just as they reached the doorway, a final, anguished scream filled the air, Victor Holloway's rage fading into nothingness. Then, silence. The Holloway Inn was gone. In its place stood an empty lot, covered in ash and rubble. The spirits had been freed. Ethan turned to Claire and Marcus, his heart still pounding. It's over. Claire let out a breathless laugh. We actually did it. As they stood under the pale moonlight, Ethan glanced down at his camera. The final image had changed. No longer an empty hallway, just a pile of ashes where the Holloway Inn had once stood. For the first time, the ghosts were truly gone. Ethan stood before the old wooden door at the end of the hallway, its surface marked by deep scratches and strange symbols. It was the only door in the hotel that refused to open, locked away from prying eyes for decades. According to the floor plans, this room didn't exist, yet here it was, daring them to enter. Marcus knelt beside the lock, tools in hand. This is an old-fashioned deadbolt, shouldn't take long. Claire shivered. Are we sure about this? There's something wrong about this door. Ethan exhaled. We need to know what's inside. With a sharp click, the lock gave way. The door creaked open, revealing a dust-filled void. As the group stepped inside, their flashlights flickered wildly. The room was untouched by time, a grand suite frozen in the moment of its last inhabitant's departure. A single suitcase lay open on the bed, its contents scattered, as if someone had been packing in a hurry. Then, a soft sobbing filled the air. Claire gasped, pointing to the corner of the room. A woman stood there, her back to them, her figure shimmering like a mirage. Her dress was from another era, torn and faded, her long hair hiding her face. Ethan raised his camera. Ma'am. Who are you? The woman turned, her face was a hollow void, an abyss that swallowed all light. The door behind them slammed shut. Marcus rushed to reopen it. It's locked. The room grew colder. The woman's form distorted. Her whispers filling their ears, "You shouldn't be here." The walls warped, the furniture rotted before their eyes. The room was changing, dragging them into its past. A violent gust sent Ethan's camera crashing to the floor. The woman lunged at Claire, shrieking. Ethan grabbed the suitcase and hurled it through the window. Glass shattered, and moonlight flooded the room. The woman recoiled, her form flickering. "Now!" Ethan yelled. They scrambled through the broken window onto the narrow ledge outside. The room behind them let out a deafening roar, then fell silent. When they dared to look back, the door was gone, as if the room had never existed. Claire clutched Ethan's arm. "We need to leave. Now." Ethan picked up his camera. "Not yet. We're closer to the truth than ever." The wind howled, carrying a single whisper from the vanished room. "Turn back. Before it's too late."